I was only 24 when I realized the weight of the world was on my shoulders. My parents, who had worked so hard to raise my sister and me, were drowning in debt. Their house, the one that held all our memories, was about to be taken away by the bank. I had no choice but to step in. I had always believed that family was everything. Growing up in a small town, my parents were the heart of our neighborhood. My father, David, worked long hours as a mechanic, fixing cars and earning just enough to keep our family afloat. My mother, Susan, was a teacher at the local elementary school. She taught the younger kids, but she taught me something even more valuable: the importance of resilience, of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. But even with their hard work, life had a way of slipping through our fingers. It started small. A car accident that wasn't their fault, mounting medical bills, a faulty plumbing job that drained their savings. One thing led to another, and soon they were sinking deeper into debt. I didn't know the full extent of it at first, not until the letters from the bank started piling up. It wasn't until the phone call came that I truly understood the gravity of our situation. My mother's voice, usually so calm and composed, trembled as she told me that the bank was threatening to foreclose on the house. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a house, it was our home. The place where my sister and I grew up. The place where my parents had their hopes and dreams wrapped up. Losing it meant losing everything. That's when I knew there was no other choice but to act. I didn't have a lot of options. I had just graduated from college, with no job prospects and bills of my own to pay. But this was family, and I wasn't going to stand by and let them lose everything. I took on more than one job: late shifts at a local diner, part-time work at a call center, anything that could bring in extra income. I started skipping meals just to save more, cutting out any luxury I had ever taken for granted, like new clothes or even a cup of coffee. I worked 16-hour days, not knowing when I would get a break, but every penny I earned went straight toward paying off my parents' debts. I didn't even have the time to grieve over my own dreams being put on hold. Each day felt heavier than the last. My body ached from lack of sleep, my mind clouded with exhaustion, but there was no time for weakness. Every time I felt like collapsing, I thought of my parents. They had given me everything they could. This was my turn to give back. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the toll it was taking on me became undeniable. I barely had time to talk to friends, let alone go on dates or enjoy the things I once took for granted. My sister, Kara, who had always been the carefree one, barely noticed. She was still living her life, going out with friends, spending money on whatever caught her eye. I'd call her occasionally, but she always had an excuse as to why she couldn't help. "Emily, I can't right now. I'm really busy with work," she would say, or "maybe next time." I felt myself getting resentful. How could she not see the weight of what I was carrying? Despite everything, I pushed through. Eventually, the mountain of bills was paid off. My parents were safe. The house was saved from foreclosure. I thought I could finally take a breath, finally allow myself to smile, knowing that I had done it. I had saved our home. When I handed over the last payment, I felt like a hero. I was exhausted, but proud. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to relax. I thought this would be my moment of victory, when my parents would look at me with pride, when they would recognize the sacrifices I had made. But little did I know, the real shock was yet to come. One morning, while I was sorting through old family documents in the attic, something caught my eye. A small envelope, buried under piles of tax papers and old receipts. It wasn't like the others. The seal was newer, and the handwriting on the front looked familiar: my mother's. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, thinking it was just another update on the mortgage or a tax form. But what I found inside stopped my heart cold. It was the deed to the house signed over to Kara. I stared at the document, my hands trembling. There, in black and white, was my sister's name signed on a new deed that transferred ownership of our family home to her. It was like a punch to the gut. How could this be? My parents had never mentioned it. They never told me about it, not even when I had been working myself to the bone to save their home. They knew what I had done. How could they betray me like this? I felt the walls close in around me. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the paper, numb with shock. The weight of the past few months seemed. I couldn't believe my eyes when I found it, the new deed to the house, signed over to Kara. My heart dropped. It was like the floor had vanished beneath me. It had been a few days since I first found the deed, but the shock still hadn't worn off. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating every breath I took. I had always considered myself a realist, someone who faced things head-on, no matter how difficult. But this? This felt like a cruel joke, one I hadn't signed up for. The house had always been more than just four walls. It was the backdrop to every significant moment in my life. It was where I celebrated my first birthday, where I brought my first boyfriend home to meet my parents, where I learned the value of hard work. And now, that piece of our history, our legacy, was gone. Stolen, not by a stranger, but by my own family. The deed, with my sister's name written in bold, was a slap in the face. I could barely make out the words through the haze of tears blurring my vision. It was official. Kara now owned our family home, not because she'd worked for it, not because she'd sacrificed for it, but because she was their favorite. The golden child who could do no wrong. I sat on the attic floor, clutching the paper like a lifeline. How could they do this to me? How could they betray me like this? I had worked myself to the bone, poured every ounce of energy into saving this place, and now it was slipping through my fingers. I was angry, so angry I could feel my blood boiling, but more than that, I felt crushed. The weight of everything I had done, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the dreams I had buried for their sake, seemed so insignificant now. It was like none of it mattered. I couldn't keep it inside any longer. I had to confront them. I had to know why they had done this. The moment I walked into the living room, I saw my parents sitting on the couch, looking calm, as if everything were fine. As if I hadn't just discovered that the home I had fought for no longer belonged to me. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I was shaking. This wasn't going to be an easy conversation. My father, David, looked up from the newspaper he was reading. "What is it, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, holding up the deed. "This," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "This is what I found in the attic. The house, our house, it's been signed over to Kara." There was a long silence, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for them to say something, anything. Finally, my mother spoke. "It's just paperwork, Emily. There's no need to make a big deal out of it." I blinked, unable to process what I had just heard. "What do you mean, just paperwork?" "This house was mine to protect. I paid off the debts. I saved this house for you." David shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. "Kara is entitled to it, Emily. You've been so focused on your work and those jobs, you've never been here. We thought it would be best." I felt like the world had stopped spinning. Best? This was what they thought was best? Giving away everything I worked for without even consulting me? You gave bit to her without telling me? After everything I did for this family? After everything I sacrificed? My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. But I couldn't hold back anymore. The anger, the frustration, the betrayal, it all bubbled to the surface in a rush of words I couldn't control. Kara entered the room then, a smug look on her face as she sauntered toward the couch. She didn't seem fazed by the storm raging inside me. Instead, she looked indifferent. Like none of this was even important. "Why are you making such a big deal, Em?" she asked, rolling her eyes. "It's just a house. You were never here anyway, so why are you acting like you were the one to save it?" I recoiled, the sting of her words cutting deep. Just a house? She had never once cared about what this house meant. To her, it had always been just a place to come home to when she felt like it. She didn't know what it felt like to bleed for something, to give up everything for it. She didn't know what it was like to be the one left holding the broken pieces while everyone else walked away unscathed. I was seething, but I tried to stay calm. You don't understand, Kara. I worked day and night for this. I gave up my life, my dreams, to make sure this house stayed in the family. And now you're acting like it doesn't matter. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice was cold. Well, maybe you should have spent more time with the family instead of working yourself to death. You're just jealous because now it's mine. I felt the weight of her words hit me harder than any of the others. Jealous? This wasn't about jealousy. This was about betrayal. This was about love and sacrifice being thrown back in my face like it was nothing. You don't know what you're talking about, Kara, I said, my voice low and trembling with hurt. You've never had to struggle for anything. You've always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And now, because you're entitled to it, you take what I've worked for without a second thought. The room went silent, but the silence was deafening. My parents didn't speak. Kara didn't seem to care. I was left standing there, clutching the deed to a home that no longer belonged to me, to a family that no longer understood me. I couldn't believe what was happening. I thought this family would always have my back. But now, the cracks were showing, and they were too big to ignore. I left the house, feeling the weight of the deed in my hands like a final reminder of everything I had lost. I had sacrificed everything to save this home, and now it had slipped through my fingers. The worst part? It didn't seem to matter to anyone else. As I stepped out the door, I knew something had broken inside me, something I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. The truth was, the first crack in my heart had appeared, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. The betrayal was real, and it was going to be harder to move past than I had ever imagined. Don't be so dramatic, they told me. Kara deserves this, don't you think? She's the one who's always been there for us. I never thought I'd hear those words from my own parents, from the people I had given everything for. But there they were, standing in front of me, dismissing my pain like it was nothing. I could feel the weight of their words sink deep into my chest, a cold, suffocating feeling wrapping itself around my heart. Don't be so dramatic. She deserves this. Those words echoed in my mind, over and over, making me feel small, unimportant, as if the sacrifices I'd made meant nothing at all. I had spent days after discovering the deed replaying the confrontation in my mind, trying to make sense of it. But each time I thought I had a grip on the truth, my parents found a way to make me doubt it. I don't understand why you're making such a fuss over this, Emily, my mother had said, shaking her head. Kara has always been there for us, always been the one who took care of us. And Kara, of course, added her voice to the chorus. You're so dramatic, Em. This is just how things are. You never needed the house anyway. You always had your own plans. At first, I tried to argue. I tried to stand my ground, to make them see how wrong this was. I had given up my own life for this family, sacrificed everything I had to save them from losing everything. And this was how they repaid me? By giving everything to Kara? But the more I spoke, the more I was met with dismissiveness, with accusations that I was selfish, that I was overreacting. They didn't listen to my hurt, they twisted it into something ugly, something that made me feel as though I was the one in the wrong. I wasn't being selfless, I was being selfish. I wasn't being hurt, I was just being dramatic. The worst part was that it started to work. Slowly, imperceptibly, I began to doubt myself. The voice in my head, once so sure of itself, now wavered. Maybe they were right? I started to wonder if I had been the one in the wrong all along. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I had been dramatic, demanding things that weren't mine to demand. The guilt weighed heavier with each passing day, until I began to second-guess every decision I'd ever made. Was it my fault that things had turned out this way? I couldn't remember the last time I felt sure of anything, the last time I felt strong. Instead, I felt myself growing smaller and smaller, like I was fading into the background of my own life. The very essence of who I was seemed to dissipate with each conversation, each dismissal, until I couldn't recognize the person staring back at me in the mirror. As time passed, I started withdrawing from the world. I didn't want to talk to my friends. I didn't want to explain my pain to anyone who might look at me with pity. It was easier to shut myself off, to push everyone away before they could see the cracks forming in my soul. The isolation became my shield, but it also became my prison. I stopped reaching out to people, stopped attending social gatherings. Even simple conversations with the few friends I had left felt too heavy, too filled with unspoken words I couldn't express. How could I tell them what I was going through when I wasn't even sure what I was feeling anymore? But it was Kara, the person I had once shared everything with, the person I had loved unconditionally, who I felt the most estranged from. I had tried to talk to her about how much the deed hurt me, how much the betrayal cut deep, but she dismissed my feelings as if they were nothing. "You need to stop being so dramatic, Em. Just let it go. It's just a house." I felt the sting of her words more than I cared to admit. My sister, who had once been my best friend, who had shared every secret, every laugh, every tear with me, was now a stranger. Her words felt like knives, twisting deeper and deeper into my heart. At night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about everything. The way my family had treated me, the way they had gaslighted me into believing that I was the problem. The emptiness in my chest grew with every passing day, every ignored call, every cold look from my parents. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. One night, after another argument with my parents, I found myself in the attic again. I had been trying to clean up the mess of old documents, trying to make sense of the chaos, but instead, I found myself staring at the deed once more. The weight of it felt unbearable, as if it was crushing me under its significance. I packed my things in silence, the weight of my parents' expectations still looming over me. But I wasn't going to be their emotional punching bag anymore. The room was quiet, save for the faint rustling of clothes and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the last of my belongings into the suitcase, but my heart, for the first time in months, felt like it was finally taking a breath. I had spent years, no, decades fighting for their approval, for their love. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of energy spent on saving a house that wasn't even mine to save. And yet, here I was, about to walk out with nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of a decision that should have been easy a long time ago. But it wasn't easy. It never was. How do you leave behind everything you've ever known? The home that raised you, the people who shaped you, even if it meant sacrificing your own happiness? I had done it for them. I had fought for them, bled for them, and still, it wasn't enough. The silence in the house was suffocating, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed when the damage is done, and everyone knows it's too late to fix anything. I had spent the past few days trying to make sense of everything. I had looked for a reason to stay, to make the family I once loved feel like it could be healed. But all I found was a festering wound, one that would never heal as long as I stayed. As I zipped up the suitcase, I could feel my chest tightening. The thought of leaving my parents, my home, hurt more than I could put into words. But it was a pain I had come to understand over the years, an ache that had only deepened the more I tried to please them. It was time to walk away. Before I could step out the door, I knew there was one last conversation that needed to happen. I took a deep breath and walked to Kara's room. I knocked once, then let myself in. She was sitting on her bed, her phone in hand, as if nothing had changed. Her eyes flickered up to meet mine with an expression I couldn't quite read, but it was too late for confusion. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She raised an eyebrow, then rolled her eyes. "Oh. So, what? You think leaving is going to make everything better?" She put her phone down and leaned back, clearly not taking me seriously. "You've really got a habit of making things harder than they need to be, don't you?" The words hit me like a slap to the face. I had expected anything that resembled an apology, or at least some acknowledgement of the pain I had been carrying. But all I got was the same indifference, the same casual dismissal of everything I had sacrificed. "You signed over the deed, Kara. You know what you did." My voice cracked slightly, but I forced myself to stand tall. "You took everything from me. And our parents let you do it." she scoffed, standing up from the bed and walking toward me. I didn't take anything. I'm entitled to it. I'm the one who's been there for them, not you. I've been the one who's made their lives easier. You just made things difficult, as usual. My jaw clenched as I fought the urge to scream. There was no reason to explain myself to her, no point in trying to make her understand. She had already made up her mind, and nothing I said would change that. You're right, I said, forcing a calmness into my voice. I've made things difficult. I've been trying to make things better for all of us, while you've sat back and reaped the rewards. But you know what, Kara? I'm done. I'm done trying to fix things that don't need fixing in your eyes. Her face twisted with annoyance, but there was something else there too, fear, maybe. Or guilt? No, that couldn't be it. She wouldn't feel guilty. She couldn't. You're making a mistake, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. You're ruining everything. This is just the way things are. You should accept it. The words felt like acid, burning every part of me. It was the final blow, the final realization that she would never change. She would always be this way, entitled and ungrateful, and no amount of sacrifice would ever be enough for her. And my parents, well, they would always enable her. They would always see her as the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, their approval, but in the end, it wasn't worth it. They didn't deserve the best of me. They had already taken it all. As I turned to leave, Kara called after me, her voice sharp and accusing. You can't just leave. You can't give up on us like this. But I didn't turn around. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was alone. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing again. The first few days were the hardest. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd been suffocating in my own life until I walked out of that house. The air felt different, lighter, as if the weight I had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted off my shoulders. The small apartment I moved into was nothing fancy, but it was mine. A tiny one-bedroom place in a quiet corner of the city, where the noise of the world didn't feel as overwhelming. There was no one to impress, no one to sacrifice for, and that made all the difference. I remember the first morning I woke up there. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm golden hues across the room. I didn't have to rush to do anything. There was no pressure to meet anyone's expectations. I could take my time, breathe, and just be. The process of starting over wasn't easy. My savings were slim, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead often weighed on me. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, or if I was even strong enough to face the world on my own. But there was one thing I knew for sure, I was done living for others. I had spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy, and now it was my turn. I took small steps at first, setting up the apartment, finding basic furniture, and sorting through the belongings I'd brought with me. There was something therapeutic about creating a space that was just for me, without the judgment or expectations of anyone else. I filled the walls with pictures, memories of my past that reminded me of who I was, not who I had been forced to be. Each day, I grew a little stronger. I started cooking meals for myself, something I hadn't done in years. It felt empowering, like I was rediscovering the person I had lost in the chaos of my family's demands. I began taking long walks, letting the rhythm of my footsteps ground me in the present. I'd never realized how disconnected I had been from myself until I took that first step toward independence. The days turned into weeks, and I slowly began to heal. There were moments when the loneliness would creep in, especially during the evenings when the apartment felt emptier than it had during the day. But I kept reminding myself that this was a new chapter. I wasn't the same person I had been just a few months ago. I was stronger, more self-assured, and finally free from the toxic love that had defined my family relationships. I started to rediscover things I loved but had forgotten. I read books I had never had time for, tried out new hobbies, and even started writing again. For the first time, I began to listen to my own voice, the one that had been drowned out by the noise of other people's opinions for so long. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could offer. They weren't interested in manipulating me or taking advantage of my kindness. I realized how much I had been missing in my old life. True friendship. Genuine connections. It was like stepping into the sunlight after being trapped in the shadows for years. The biggest shift came when I found the courage to change careers. I had spent so much of my life doing things I didn't love, just to get by, just to please my parents. But now, for the first time, I had the chance to follow my own passions. I applied for jobs in a field I had always been curious about but never thought I could pursue. And to my surprise, I was hired. I remember the first day of my new job. It was terrifying, but exhilarating. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I was finally doing something that made me feel alive. Each day at work, I realized that my worth didn't come from my family's approval or anyone else's validation. I didn't need them to tell me I was doing the right thing. I knew it now. As I stood there in my apartment one evening, looking out at the city skyline, I realized something profound. I had reached a crossroads. I could call my family. I could apologize for leaving, beg for their forgiveness, and try to fix things. But deep down, I knew I didn't need them to validate me anymore. The approval I had once sought so desperately was no longer important. What mattered now was my peace, my happiness, and my future. I had already found the most important thing, myself. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Years passed. But the past has a way of creeping back, and when I least expected it, Kara came knocking on my door. The return of Kara. It had been a long time since I had heard from Kara. After everything that happened, I thought I'd never hear from her again. But life has a funny way of forcing you to face the past, even when you think you've left it behind. One rainy afternoon, as I was organizing my bookshelf in the living room, there was a knock at my door. I didn't recognize the face when I opened it, but the moment I saw the familiar eyes, those same eyes that had once belonged to my best friend, my sister, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Kara. She looked different. The confident, carefree young woman I had known was now weary, with dark circles under her eyes and a look of desperation on her face. She didn't look like the person I had left behind. She looked lost. I need your help, she stammered, her voice breaking. Everything's falling apart. I lost my job, my marriage. I don't know what to do anymore. It was surreal. Here I was, a woman who had rebuilt her life from nothing, and standing before me was the sister who had once taken everything from me. I had spent so many years healing, so many years learning to live for myself. And now, the one person who had hurt me more than anyone else was asking me for help. Part of me wanted to say yes. The sisterly love, the memories of all those childhood years spent together, tugged at my heart. But I wasn't the same person anymore. I had changed. I wasn't the self-sacrificing young woman who would have put her family's needs above her own. I wasn't going to throw away my peace and happiness for someone who had never cared about mine. I looked at Kara, my heart torn between the love I still felt for her and the woman I had become, the woman who had learned to protect herself. I wasn't sure if I could help her, not in the way she expected. But I knew I couldn't ignore the feelings that were bubbling up inside me. The need to stand up for myself, to reclaim my power, was stronger than ever. Do you even remember what you did? I asked, my voice steady, despite the rush of emotions. Kara flinched at my words, but she didn't interrupt. I sacrificed everything, Kara, I continued. I gave up my dreams, my happiness, my health to save that house, to save our family. I worked myself into the ground, and you, I paused, swallowing the anger that had begun to rise in my throat. You took it all. You took our parents' love, their trust, and you threw it away. You took the house I saved and made it yours. And when I was broken, when I needed you the most, you turned your back on me. The silence that followed was deafening. Kara stood there, her eyes filled with guilt, but she didn't speak. I knew she understood. She knew I was right. But for the first time, I wasn't the one seeking validation. I wasn't the one pleading for her to understand my pain. I was finally the one speaking my truth. I spent years trying to make sense of it all, I said, my voice shaking but resolute. I tried to convince myself that I was the problem, that maybe I hadn't been good enough. But no, Kara. I wasn't the problem. You were. And now, I'm done. Kara's eyes welled with tears, but I didn't feel pity for her. Not anymore. I had let go of that part of myself. I wasn't going to be the martyr, the one who always forgave, always sacrificed. This time, I wasn't going to allow her to take any more from me. I won't help you, I said softly but firmly. Not because I don't care, but because I need to protect myself. I've spent too long putting everyone else first. I won't do it anymore. Kara looked at me, her face crumpling with emotion, but I couldn't afford to be weak this time. I had already given up too much. As I closed the door, a sense of relief washed over me. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right decision. I had chosen myself. And that was the most important thing I could do. I learned that my worth isn't measured by my sacrifices for others, but by how much I love myself. It took me a long time to understand, but I finally got their peace, real peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from the approval of others but from the deep knowing that I am enough, just as I am. Since the confrontation with Kara, my life had continued to unfold in ways I never imagined. I had let go of the need to please my family, to keep fighting for their love and acceptance. And with that, I found freedom. My career flourished. I was good at what I did, and for the first time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it for me. Each day, I took small steps to reclaim myself. I learned to set boundaries, something I never thought I deserved to do before. I didn't have to say yes to every request or put everyone else's needs above mine. I learned the art of saying no, of choosing myself, and I wasn't sorry for it. I was rebuilding my life not because I owed anyone anything, but because I deserved it. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the weight of the past crept in, when I felt that familiar pang of longing for the family I had once hoped to keep together. But I had come to realize something crucial: I couldn't change them. I couldn't make them see the things I saw or value me the way I had always hoped. And that was okay. I finally stopped waiting for their approval. I stopped yearning for their love, the kind of love that was conditional and manipulative. Instead, I focused on the love that came from within. My friends, my colleagues, even strangers, these were the people who validated me now. They saw me for who I truly was, and that was all that mattered. I knew that, no matter where life took me, I was strong enough to face it. I had survived the worst, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I had learned to live for myself, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. As I stood in front of the mirror one evening, taking in the woman staring back at me, I couldn't help but smile. She was strong, resilient, and free. The woman who once thought her worth was tied to her family's expectations had found her true worth. And it was more than enough. This journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every painful step. I had learned to stand tall, even when everyone around me tried to tear me down. I had learned that my value didn't come from how much I gave or sacrificed for others, it came from the love I had for myself. As the story comes to an end, my hope for anyone reading this is simple. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone convince you that your worth is tied to your ability to please them. Your worth is inherent. It's yours, and you deserve to live a life that reflects that.